A public affairs program discussing the important crossroad of religion and life, produced by the Austin Metropolitan Ministries in cooperation with KTBC-TV. Austin Faith Dialogue highlights the interaction of the religious community with the social and cultural issues throughout our area. Now, today's edition of Austin Faith Dialogue.
Good day. I'm Richard Thompson, pastor of Central Presbyterian Church, and your host for this edition of Austin Faith Dialogue. The Declaration of Independence holds a number of important principles for this country, but probably greater of all is the separation of church and state. It's this important principle that in our early beginnings differentiated our country from the empires of Europe. But don't be fooled. Religion plays an important role in U.S. politics. Some of our founding fathers were religious leaders. While the pulpit is where the African-American community first found its voice in its fight for civil rights, even the current political debate on abortion has its origins in the church. So is it any surprise that in this topsy-turvy political year of 1992, the candidates running for president are trying to make their pitch to all voters, especially to those in the pews? We asked producer Roger Lotz to take a look at the various aspects of campaign 1992.
By the time one candidate is nominated at the party convention, that candidate has faced a number of obstacles and is hopefully better prepared for the tougher campaign ahead. But somewhere in 1992, this simple but usually predictable scenario was altered.
Now, you've set the standard for all of the big states in this country by delivering Texas.
You could say Texans, or specifically one Texan, made the campaign for the White House quite different this year. H. Ross Perot, the self-made billionaire from the Lone Star State, said he wanted to play some hardball with the same old bunch who would be running for president, and for a while he did. He made the race for the White House seem like a cakewalk, but then reality set in, and as quickly as he made his appearance on the campaign trail, he said goodbye. Or did he? As of the taping of this report, H. Ross Perot's name can be found on the ballots of at least 42 states, and there is quite a good deal of hope, even belief, that the Perot name will be on the ballots of all 50 states, so he could have an influence in the election outcome even at this late date. Then there are the two party candidates. The incumbent, George Bush, has faced a difficult year. First, he was challenged by a conservative Republican candidate by the name of Patrick Buchanan. Then the Los Angeles riots began, and the Bush administration took a lot of criticism from Democrats for being in charge of the social and economic atmosphere in which this event occurred. Simply put, the economy hasn't been a friend for George Bush in 1992. The man who led us during the Gulf War was having his problems at home. On the other hand, Arkansas Governor Bill Clinton was having a tough road of his own to the nomination as the Democratic candidate, from questions of his fidelity to concerns about the true intentions of his draft status during Vietnam. The Clinton campaign became quite adept in the political art of damage control. Governor Clinton even became the butt of late-night talk show hosts on the question of did he inhale or didn't he when he supposedly tried marijuana as a youth. But both men survived and made it to their party's convention as their party's nominee. And then the campaigning really started.
In the name of all those who do the work, pay the taxes, raise the kids, and play by the rules. In the name of the hard-working Americans who make up our forgotten middle class, I proudly accept your nomination for President of the United States.
This convention is the first at which an American president can say, the Cold War is over and freedom finished first.
This election is about putting power back in your hands and putting the government back on your side. It's about putting people first.
House leadership has not changed in 38 years. It is a body caught in a hopelessly tangled web of PACs, perks, privileges, partnership, and paralysis.
George Bush, if you won't use your power to help America, step aside. I will.
What about the leader of the Arkansas National Guard, the man who hopes to be commander-in-chief? Well, I bit the bullet, and he bit his nails.
The 1992 presidential campaign has had one major theme, change. Governor Clinton, as the challenger, says he is the person to bring fresh ideas into the White House, and he has had quite a successful time hitting the road with a bus tour that even made a scheduled August appearance here in Austin. At that time, the theme change was ringing loud and clear.
We have tried it their way for 12 long years. In 1980, we had the highest wages in the world, and now we're 13th. Most Americans and most people in this crowd today come from families that are working harder today for less money than they were making 10 years ago.
But the president, not to be outdone, has resurrected a political argument from the past to make his point for the future. Just as Harry Truman stated in 1948, change is needed, but George Bush wants to see change in the Congress.
Hey, listen, you listen to these guys and you think their deficit is the big game of the Wheel of Fortune? You know that one? They want to buy 3 vowels? IOU. That's not good enough for the American taxpayer.
Ironically, though, this television program may have the biggest impact on the election of 1992. When Vice President Dan Quayle used the TV program Murphy Brown as a primary example of what he felt were America's slipping family values, he started the now famous "Whose family values is it anyway?" debate. If the family value issue is decided, it is more than likely to happen on Election Day.
We're now joined by 2 persons whom we'll be giving an opportunity to offer their reading of the current political landscape and how it can impact each of us, both the general voter and the religious community in particular. Our first guest is an instructor at the Austin-based Episcopal Seminary of the Southwest. There she teaches Christian ethics and moral theology. She is also currently working on her PhD and has a Master in Divinity from Yale. We welcome Susan Dolan Henderson. We also are happy to have join us a distinguished man in law, academic administration, as well as government. Max Sherman is Professor of Public Affairs and Dean of the Lyndon B. Johnson School of Public Affairs located at the University of Texas at Austin. We thank you both for joining us today. And Max, I'd like to have you speak first because it was just 4 years ago that you were on a similar program on Austin Faith Dialogue in which we were offering election reflections then. What's the main difference between that election and this one as you see it?
Rich, I think that one of the things is probably the early success of the Ross Perot campaign, which the clips at the beginning of the program indicated, is that there is a great lack of confidence, or it may be a lack of trust, credibility in the political process. And that the people who supported that campaign early, it seemed to me, said that neither Republicans nor Democrats had delivered on their promises, had fulfilled the expectations that people had. And I think that a lot of people were disillusioned when the collapse of that campaign occurred. And now they have 2 choices, and there's a lot of rhetoric. And I think you still have a lot of that disillusionment that's taking place in society.
Okay, so there's more sense of disillusionment this time around, accounting for the Ross Perot factor. I don't remember talking about Murphy Brown the last election. Why do you think that's come into play?
I think that the Republican Party is somewhat on the defensive at this point because the polls have collapsed for them, and therefore I think that as a political strategy they were looking for issues to try to revive what was a major part of the constituency, which was the far right, the religious right, as it's been characterized, and that this was one of those issues that resonated with people in that perceived category, and therefore they tried to identify those issues. I think what's happened up until this date of November the 1st is that they have moved away strongly from that. The Democrats have also picked it up, as you saw in Governor Clinton's comments, so both parties have used those issues in different ways.
It's been interesting because Democrats have, instead of talking about family values, have talked about valuing families and are saying we're not going to forfeit this issue to you at this particular time. I think one of the things too, Susan, as we look at the election as a whole, is that in some of the news analysis programs they have tended to identify the Democrats as the party that gives the emphasis to change, and they have the Republicans as the party that's giving the emphasis to trust. Now, how do you feel? Is this a change or a trust election, or neither?
Well, I think it's a change election on the whole, although I think that part of the problems with the way Americans approach the political race over the trust issue is this kind of micro-examination of politicians' personal lives. And I think that the issue of policy is a much more important yardstick to judge candidates by than this kind of, well, what have they did in their personal life? Have they lied about it? You know, are they perfect? And this kind of thing. And I would like to see people focus on what are these people saying that they're going to do in government? How are they going to take care of the poor and the weak? And the things that I'm concerned about as a Christian theologian, more than these issues of whether they've led perfect lives.
So you think that that's a misplaced emphasis to say, well, you know, have you had an affair with somebody, or have you lied at some point in terms of your record? You think it has to do with
well, there's some parts of that that are important. I mean, obviously you don't want a chronic liar as President of the United States either. I mean, you want to avoid that. But we are kind of a nation caught up in gossip. We seem to really enjoy that, and that shouldn't sidetrack us, though, from the policy issues, which are the most important things about the candidates.
Okay. Max, I'd be interested in your reaction. I mean, one of the big issues has been Bill Clinton's draft record.
Right.
Did he really try to get out of the draft? Was he, as Bush was quoted as saying, biting his nails instead of biting the bullet?
Right.
So is that to change the subject instead of talking about issues such as the deficit and trying to get people away from
I think it's
policy?
a diversion from the subject, and I think it's appropriate in a political campaign to raise questions of a person's record, because I think that to a large extent people vote for someone that they hope to be in a position of leadership, and so both candidates are going to be scrutinized, and those issues are going to be there. But it's only a piece of the package to look at how they are really going to deal with issues that are probably the true issues of family values. Do I have a job? If I'm able to work and I can take care of my family, that's what I would like to do. And so the economy, and both candidates and both parties have talked about it, is a legitimate issue. How do you pay for it? The issue of the deficit, both parties are promising pie in the sky and not really owning up to the issue, do we have to raise taxes, do we cut something? Instead, both parties are rushing to pour more money into continuing a military establishment that at this point they had conceded months ago probably needed to be pulled down. And so they're both going in the opposite directions, and that's part of the reason that the Perot thing made sense to a lot of people, is that he was saying you must deal with this issue, you have to cut something in order to pay for it.
It was interesting to me that it wasn't until Perot had pulled out of the race that he issued his declaration of what needed to be done, his list of policies, so including things like going after entitlements and saying you can't really reduce the deficit meaningfully unless you put a limit on the Medicare expenditures, unless you, on what was Social Security COLAs, cost of living adjustments had to be lowered or eliminated, and that is political suicide for, I mean, is it something which either Bush or Clinton should come out for in a Perot-like fashion, do you think, Susan?
Well, I'd like to see both of them come out with exactly what they're going to do about the deficit and to say the hard things. I mean, part of the problem is that they're promising to cut taxes and take care of the deficit. They're promising to preserve the environment and have jobs. And all those things just aren't going to be possible. I think one of the turning points in the Carter-Reagan campaign was when Carter went on television and said to the American people that they might have to sacrifice. And people just did not like that message, and I think that was part of his political suicide, if you will.
Okay, well, we'll come back to both the past and the present in just a few moments, but we're going to have to take a break, and when we return, we'll continue our discussion of Election Reflections 1992.
Serving Austin means serving you. That has always been the primary goal of Austin Metropolitan Ministries. We are religion in action through the work of these organizations. Each plays a key role in making the capital city a better place to live, but we can't do it alone. Do you have some spare time, talents, or any resources that you can share? If you do, please call AMM at 472-7627, because serving Austin means serving you.
We're back on Austin Faith Dialogue, discussing the current role of religion in this year's political arena. With our two guests, Susan Dolan Henderson and Max Sherman. I'd like to come back now specifically to the role of religion in this campaign. And I think that we have been discussing some of the implicit connections, how even something like the economy, the deficit has some moral implications, but then there have been some explicit kinds of things, such as, I believe it was after the convention, President Bush said that the GOD was not a word mentioned in the Democratic platform. And what's your reaction to that as an issue in the campaign, Max?
I think politically it's probably turned out to be a serious error to assume that one party can co-opt the religious issue. And I think what polls have shown, and as people have backed away from that there are other issues that are there. And it probably follows on the heels of the fact that that was very much an issue in both Reagan elections and very, very prominent. And even in President Reagan's concluding remarks at the convention, he concluded as he always did, God bless this country, you know, and that reference was there. But I think people are looking for more. They're probably looking for a fuller expression of what values are, and both parties again tried to do it. But I think that the public probably has forced the political process to move beyond just saying something, and that's enough.
So what's your reading about the explicitly religious component of this election, Susan?
Well, I think it's been problematic on the whole because the way the language has been used invokes a very monolithic idea of what religion might be. And that is something that H. Richard Niebuhr actually wouldn't like, and that it seems to be
H.
used.
Richard Niebuhr, the ethicist at Yale Divinity School.
Right, that's right. I mean, he would not have liked the way religion's being invoked because people are saying it's us versus them. We have God and they don't, kind of language, as if they own God themselves instead of that. In fact, God cannot be owned by them.
Well, I think that one of the things that probably may happen as a result of some attempt to link God with one party or another is that in the future there may be less impulse to do that, because one thing is not effective politically to try to wrap yourself up in religion any more than in the flag, in a sense. And I have a hunch, too, that it may be that we'll have more of a recognition. Listen, we know that you're as sincere in your faith as we are in our faith, and we're not going to get into some kind of contest of being holier than thou sort of thing. Do you think that we may be getting beyond that now, Max?
I think so, and I think it's part of, again, if you look at politics over a long period of time, issues come and go. And I think, again, you have to go back to Ronald Reagan when you had the Association of Ministers and the Jerry Falwell taking a very active role, and the television evangelists were very much before people, and it was a powerful force. If you read all about the Reagan elections, it was a very powerful force. It does not have that same impact today, although many of those constituencies, I think, are just as strong, and they probably do like to hear candidates talk about these issues. So again, I think all of society does not react the same way to it. There are people who would be disappointed in any candidate, be it a Democrat or a Republican, who did not try to deal with some of those, what they perceive as being religious issues.
Okay, but you're drawing the distinction between religious issues as it might attach itself to certain moral questions and trying to, on the other hand, invoke the name of God in behalf of your particular
political
position.
party, right.
I think that one of the other things that has really distinguished this campaign is that at the Republican convention, Pat Buchanan, I don't remember his exact words, but I remember the words in there about we're going to have to get into a religious war in this country, a cultural war. And I think that probably disturbed people even within his own party. What's your response to that, the effect of that kind of approach, Susan?
Right. As a matter of fact, it did disturb people in the party. I've seen many moderate Republicans on TV really worried about that language. I think the church has a bad record on the holy war issue, that in the years that it was aligned with politics, that in fact a lot of damage was done, forced conversions and killings and this kind of thing, that language of the holy war is very dangerous, and that we should in fact avoid it.
That it was like in Europe, where you had these religious wars, 30 Years' War, and people killing each other in the name of Christ, and that this invites a divisiveness that we haven't had before in this country.
Right, and the whole, you know, in quotes, American experiment has been to have learned from what happened in Europe in the religious wars, and to develop a government where many ideas of God could in fact be held and shared among the people.
You know, go ahead, Mac.
Let me just say one thing. It seems to me that when we get to this particular discussion, there's always a danger, because in a sense a political campaign is not like governing. Political parties are not even in the Constitution. I mean, it's a creature apart from the Constitution in our government. And in a way it does reflect all of society. So if you take that, and I guess I basically think that any issue is appropriate to be discussed, but if you try to take over that issue and make it your issue, then you run a very grave risk. But to talk about religion, to talk about family values, to talk about patriotism, things that people have held dear, that political process does reflect whatever society thinks about those issues at a given moment of history.
Okay, I'm going to run a constitutional test by you, Max. You're our authority here in the LBJ school, and we've got this doctrine of separation of church and state that's built into the First Amendment. Now, speak to us about prayers in school.
Of course, I think if you speak about prayers in schools, you have to go back to the Supreme Court decision, and I think probably a decision that's been very much misunderstood. The heart of the original decision was that the state of New York could not dictate what prayer was to be said in the public schools of New York. And I think most religious groups said that was a correct decision. Government should not be in that business. That's not the role of government. And it doesn't speak to my ability to pray, to meditate, to do whatever I would do, but government cannot do that. And so that really is at the heart of that issue, I think, and it's a true separation of religion and government issue.
So that would be an example of where the separation of church and states has a clear meaning from your standpoint.
Yes.
I've heard it, I think it was Republican Senator Lowell Weicker at the time that this was being debated, said there will always be prayers in schools as long as there are algebra tests.
That's right.
But it's just not going to be state approved. Susan, this is the year of the women in the election in a way that has been unprecedented. 11 candidates for the Senate who are women, a number in the House. And give us your reading about the impact this is going to have over the long term, assuming that some of these folks are elected who are women candidates.
Well, I think they'll have quite an impact, especially if the women choose to keep the values of the feminist movement that many of them come from, and values of care and connection and concern for others. In other words, if women are elected and then they do the same things that they're criticizing once they get power, then I don't think there's any net gain for any of us if that happens. And so I'm really hoping that women can in fact inform government with some values that have in fact been missing.
Okay, so let's apply that to a particular issue. Let's take the abortion issue, which is still with us as a very lively source of debate in the current election. Do you feel that that's going to make a difference, to have women in office more represented in office in regard to decisions about abortion?
Well, I think that will make a difference. I mean, I think that one of the issues in the abortion debate is this idea that if the government seeks to regulate it, then it is in fact men who have control over women's bodies, because the government is predominantly run by men. So one of the problems in that discussion about restricting abortion is the fact that women have no voice in that process if in fact it does happen. I think that just exacerbates all the issues surrounding abortion, that again it's a group of men that seek to control women, and that women in fact have no participation or say in that process.
I think one of the more interesting aspects of this election year is that Republican women for office have been pro-choice in many, if not most cases, and that the Republican Party itself has had some indication that it's not monolithic in this regard. There's been some pro-life voice raised in the Democratic Party, although I don't think to the same extent. But Max, do you see this maybe as being the last year when abortion is such a on the front burner issue kind of thing?
I think the fact that it's become an issue, it was a campaign, it was a platform issue at the Republican convention and at the state convention in Texas, that it's no longer as strong an issue as it's been in the past. But one thing in your comments, and it seems to me that in the whole feminist movement, and the fact that there are 11 women who are now candidates for the U.S. Senate, what it really says is that probably the American dream is being realized, that every individual is going to be measured by his or her ability, and that you're starting to have role models. You're starting to have many women governors. You'll have more women U.S. senators. We have from almost every ethnic and racial group. People are now moving, and so young children coming along can really see that the dream can be their dream. Okay. And that's not always been true. I think it's a very profound change that we're seeing in this last decade of the 20th century.
I think we also have, in addition to that kind of change, one note that was sounded in the Democratic convention by Clinton that could be picked up again by both parties in the future, and that's the covenant idea. That's very much a biblical notion. And whether Clinton is elected or not, I think that kind of gives a feeling for what the comity, the mutual respect that is needed as we go into the future, where we give other people the benefit of the doubt, where a candidate on one party can actually say of the other, congratulations on your success in foreign policy, or congratulations on your success in state government, and that sort of mutual appreciation. About 10 seconds.
Okay. I was just going to say, I come from the LBJ school, and one of the things that people forget is that Lyndon Johnson and Sam Rayburn helped to make Eisenhower a very successful president.
Okay. I'd like to thank you for making this a very successful program, Susan and Max, and you folks be with us again next week on our next edition of Austin Faith Dialogue. I'm Richard Thompson, on behalf of Austin Metropolitan Ministries, and peace be with you. For more information, call Austin Metropolitan Ministries at 472-7627.
What does the future hold in store?